Thank you. Ask any members of council, is there any declaration of pecuniary interest or general nature thereof from anyone? Seeing none at this point in time, it certainly can be declared if it does arise at any time. We have one piece of work today. I guess the way to explain it, we have a presentation from Murray Clark, who has been hired by Grey County, dealing with an issue of land and expansion and the prosperity of West Grey and the demise, and Hanover. Murray, welcome this morning. Pleasure to have you here. And I'm going to turn it over to you so that we can get down to the facts of where we're at and where we can go forward with this. Thank you for joining us, Murray.
Thanks so much, Your Worship, and thank you, members of council and staff and the team for having me today. It was a lovely drive up from Guelph this morning. I think we could advance to the next slide, please. By way of an introduction before we get to me, the municipalities of West Grey and Hanover have had tremendous growth potential, are experiencing tremendous growth potential. And as neighbors, we can work together, find mutually beneficial solutions that will see both communities in our region prosper. I was engaged by the county to support and help facilitate these conversations of discussion with West Grey and Hanover. And finally, on that slide, through facilitated discussions, we can better understand our opportunities and openly discuss the best interests of our communities. Go to agenda, please. I'll review the agenda and then I'll share a few housekeeping notes. The agenda, as you see, sets out primary goals. I'll talk a little bit about myself, hopefully not too much. I'm going to talk about the planning context here and the context for growth, looking at the big picture. Some thoughts on economic considerations, economic development considerations potentially. Look at West Grey's growth history and Hanover's growth history. Touch on Grey County OPA number 11, which will be familiar to you, of course. Summary of research that's been undertaken to date. Saw a set of important considerations to reflect on, and then some suggested next steps for this process. First of all, wanted to reinforce that the material that you have, that you're going to be seeing over this slide deck, 39 slides, is truly a collaborative effort prepared by committee, really, with significant input from your CAO, Laura, and the senior team at Grey County and Laura's counterpart in Hanover. Much of the presentation, I think the content will be familiar to you. However, it's my sense that the approach on the matter is, from my perspective at least, new and fairly fresh potential path forward. My role really here is as somewhat of a messenger, a facilitator to support the conversation. And I would offer, if you have questions as we work through the slide deck at any point, just of course through the chair, please do if you have comments or questions. However, full disclosure, certain of the more technical and more detailed background content, I think, would perhaps be more familiar and better answered if there are queries from your senior team here. Just a brief note on why I'm here and how I came to be engaged. I retired almost 6 years ago, a little early, after a 37-year career in local government, 34 years as a chief administrative officer. I described, Laura's heard this from me before. I describe myself as a recovering CAO, and I haven't quite successfully shed the lens that I look through after 34 years as a CAO. And that's how I really tend to look at the municipal world. After I retired, I loved the municipal business. I was ideally suited for a career as a CAO in the small municipal world. Wanted to stay involved in the business. I launched my company with that admittedly a fuzzy business plan and very low expectations. And I was very fortunate. I've been busy. I've had to turn away work. It's been extraordinary in terms of the variety of tasks that have come my way, including almost 1 full year as interim CAO at Bruce County. And that's how I came to know Kim Wingrove, the CAO of Bruce County, a little better. And we had some conversations on matters of mutual interest, and came to know Laura quite well. I finished at the end of December a 2-year contract with the Ontario Municipal Administrators Association as Strategic Initiatives Coordinator. And so in a sense, Laura was one of my bosses in that initiative. So I've remained engaged in the business. I've remained current. Among the work that I've done is a range of consulting work. And I worked with AMO during the last election cycle, previous to this one, to develop a land use planning module for the new councillor orientation program, and delivered that all across the province. I've done 25 online virtual presentations of that workshop. AMO elected to go in a different direction, and so I've taken that on myself. And I've been really quite busy over the last few months with that. Currently, I'm just finishing up a major project for Mapleton, supporting their strategic planning initiative, and other work on the go. So that's enough about me. If we could perhaps have the next slide. I want to offer, again, sort of a subjective comment that understanding the sensitivities on this issue and recognizing that there is history here, of course. My coming to West Grey first is intended really, I think, to be somewhat of a symbolic message, a positive message that I'm going to outline in more detail, but it was really felt that moving forward, that it was important to reinforce that this is a conversation that involves equals, and just wanted to reinforce that it was a thoughtful decision to come here first. So as I work through the slide deck, we're going to attempt to understand the current growth scenarios for both municipalities. Again, I would look for staff if there are any detailed questions there. Understand the opportunities, the positive impact that strategic growth can bring to both the municipalities and our broader region. The path forward is hopefully to open the door for fresh dialogue between the two municipalities, and then to chart a path forward, creating mutual prosperity. And that's really a term that should really reinforce that this exercise, if it is to advance, must in order to achieve success, be totally based on the notion of mutual prosperity, and to use sort of a hackneyed expression, a win-win. And if you include the county, I guess win-win-win. That no one's in the back seat. And I would offer, again, subjective comment that to a certain degree, West Grey is in the driver's seat if there is a driver and a passenger here. Move on, please. Next slide, please. Initiating discussions. I came on board really just after the election in October last year to support the conversation. You will have awareness, I think, from reports from your CAO that there have been a series of discussions to date, meetings in Owen Sound. We stressed right from the outset, and I think we had complete accord on this, that this overall conversation must be conducted in an open and transparent fashion. That the work we've done so far really has been typical of staff supporting our elected folks. And that is really just strictly gathering information and sharing information and our thoughts on what councils need to engage at the elected level in the conversation. And the mutual goals here are as to reinforce the notion of win-win-win, where all parties would benefit. And we'll talk about some examples in Ontario that are current and where that has been manifested. Next slide, please. Exploring all options. Thank you. You're intuitive now. Thank you. Exploring all options are on the table. There really isn't anything in this conversation that shouldn't be explored. Options that lead to mutual prosperity that can be efficiently implemented and affected should be explored. Grey County OPA 11 recognize that the purpose of this project, it may be broader than potential future secondary plan areas as identified in the OPA number 11. We have done, and we would continue on direction to research other communities. The county have been really quite thorough in researching other municipal approaches towards growth and boundary challenges, and a summary has been shared with all the parties. And we know, really as a sidebar observation, I would offer that the province's aggressive housing agenda and the tsunami of legislation that we've seen over the past few months has certainly impacted on conversations across the province, particularly in Southern Ontario, the GTA and the Greater Golden Horseshoe area, issues around growth and settlement in urban service areas. And we have seen some rather dramatic decisions coming out of the minister's office in terms of municipal zoning orders and boundary adjustments. Hamilton would be a recent example of that experience. Move on, thanks. Introduction to provincial policy. I think you're all familiar with the agenda that we have been working under over the last few months. Pursuant to the provincial policy statement, which is the overall governing collection of policy guiding and directing land use in Ontario. Provincial policy statement, PPS as it's called. Municipalities are required to plan for their population and employment growth needs for up to 25 years. Many municipalities are projecting further. Upper tier municipalities are mandated to identify and allocate population, housing, and employment growth. Projections are included in the Grey County official plan. And finally, on that slide, a revised growth management study was completed by Grey County in 2021. The policy provides that municipalities may use and refine growth numbers to plan for growth and infrastructure needs across all aspects of land use planning. A statement from the policy: municipalities are required to use land efficiently and intensify growth before expanding settlement areas. And that's an important point to reinforce in the conversation that we're having right now. And finally, the PPS statement, the PPS prioritizes growth in settlement areas with full municipal services. Quite logical. Are there any questions at this point? You're all very familiar, I think, with the scenario.
If I could, Mary, the PPS, is there, from your connections, I heard over the weekend and a couple of other places, And just a short past that the PPS is, the province is going to open that up and be a review here in short order.
Well, I've not that I have the inside track, Your Worship, but it is it's a good observation. It's a good question. You know that the PPS was finally revised after quite a protracted period in 2020, and there is some, I guess, scuttlebutt in the industry that the province may open up the PPS to really to reinforce, I guess, and buttress the series of legislation, Bill 23, for example, particularly the Greenbelt protection and the decision that was taken to switch lands out from the Greenbelt and add land in. As it happens, that 7,200 acres is already largely protected. Remains to be seen, Your Worship, whether that really is on the table at the caucus and the cabinet level. I know AMO's been very active in tracking, analyzing the legislation and what it means. But I don't have a solid answer for you on when we might see the PPS reviewed. We waited a long time for the 2020 amendments, and I would say we just really have to wait and see. Moving to growth scenarios, growth projections, Grey County growth context. Of course, there are 9 member municipalities with land area and population, and these numbers are projected as of 2021 or identified. All Grey County municipalities are growing and planning for infrastructure needs, which is certainly the case all across Southern Ontario. And planning for growth takes time. You all know that. Municipalities are really challenged to be proactive and to plan years in advance. And of course, that suggests long-term capital plans, infrastructure plans, and implications for development charges and what the changes in legislation mean in that regard. It's certainly a challenging time for municipalities. And someone said to me recently at a municipal session that, boy, you know, there's never been such a challenging time in our sector. But I would offer, now that I'm 43 years in the business, it was ever thus. There is always challenge in our world. And I think back to the who does what and sorting out that time. This is a challenging time, but I think it was ever thus. Of course, one of the considerations here, a sidebar that we perhaps would never have projected, is the influence of social media and how that impacts on our deliberations. Economic considerations. Municipalities do need a supply of service land, excuse me, Your Worship, to meet projected growth needs. Designated zone service land for employment, residential and commercial development. It does spur investment in the community. There is, I think, the ability to be nimble and flexible and having a variety of parcel sizes, locations, and prices available to make a community attractive and to respond to market demands. In looking at land options, limited land options appeal to a smaller group of developers. It slows growth and delays return on investment from service extensions, and that also goes to market and supply and demand. Further on, economic considerations, economic development considerations, it is ideal to have a range of available lands and diversity of landowners to meet those market needs and respond to demand and provide the supply and ensure developers have a choice for buying land to develop, and that consumers have a choice in the residential purchases that they make. Grey County works with all 9 member municipalities to ensure their long-term growth needs can be met. And finally, on that slide, much of the planned growth is within logically, again, within serviced settlement areas. Looking at specifically West Grey and Hanover growth scenario, Hanover is approximately 980 hectares in size. You can see the graphic there. West Grey is approximately 88,000 hectares in size. Hanover is entirely designated as a settlement area, and West Grey has a mix of settlement areas and rural or agricultural areas. Drilling down a little further into what West Grey's growth needs, West Grey is projected to grow as follows by 2046, pursuant to the county's growth management study. That would suggest an influx of just under 1,800 people, 840 households, and 680 jobs on the employment side. Logically, most of the growth is expected in the settlement areas of Durham and Neustadt, which are shown in red on the schedule, with some growth also in the secondary settlement areas shown in orange on the map. And Durham and Neustadt both have municipal water and sewer services. Continuing on, West Grey's growth context. West Grey has recently experienced growth with 2 large subdivisions in Durham. Other subdivisions and multi-residential developments are in the planning stages in Durham. Ongoing redevelopment of the Rockwood Terrace long-term care home. Recent proposed expansion of Chapman's into West Grey. I know a little bit about the Chapman family and what they've done to support the hospice in Owen Sound. My wife was very active and remains very active in the hospice business. What a wonderful family operation, Chapman's. 2 older draft approved subdivisions in Neustadt, and continued interest in the industrial park outside of Mount Forest. Further on, West Grey's growth context. West Grey is currently in the middle of an official plan review to ensure your community's long-term planning needs are being met. And your official plan applies currently only to Durham and Neustadt. Currently, there is not a settlement area land shortage in West Grey. Neustadt is a community that I really want to visit. I was shown recently some images of a tunnel system beneath, I think, what was once a brewery. Am I correct there? It looks fascinating, and that's on my Ontario Explorer list. Moving over to Hanover, Hanover's growth context. Hanover is expected to grow as follows by 2046, again pursuant to the growth management study. Just over 3,400 people are projected, with 1,700 households and employment of just under 1,500 new jobs. That's fairly significant. In the past 13 years, Hanover has completed and refined a number of growth studies, and these indicate that Hanover does not have enough land to meet their growth needs over the next 20 plus years. Drilling further down, Hanover's growth context. Hanover's studies have examined their governing planning policies, servicing and infrastructure needs, impact on the natural environment, impact on agriculture, which is a very significant point, and suitable locations for future growth opportunities. A little history, this will be familiar to you all, I'm sure. To facilitate long-term growth of lands adjacent to Hanover, West Grey and Hanover have previously worked together with the county to investigate growth opportunities on lands in West Grey adjacent to Hanover. And for example, in 2012, 11 years ago, OPA 80 was approved, created a future secondary plan area in West Grey abutting the east end of Hanover. In 2015, 3 years further on, OPA 122 designated portions of that future secondary plan area as highway commercial and open space. And a couple of notes, OPA 122 was a joint application between West Gray and Hanover. And second point, OPAs 80 and 122, of course, did not change the municipal boundary. History reinforced these maps, these plans illustrate the areas incorporated in both OPA 80 in 2012 and Official Plan Amendment 122 in 2015, identifying the future secondary plan area, Hanover West Gray secondary plan area, the agricultural designation, balance of rural, primary settlement areas, and hazard lands, outlining Hanover's official plan amendment and West Gray official plan amendments of 2012 and 2015. Little further information on Hanover's growth. Yes, Your Worship.
Murray, just, and maybe it is explained a little further on, but just quick question. Out of that plan, OPA 122, how much of that land in West Gray has been developed?
If I may, Your Worship, I would direct that question to your staff.
Mm-hmm.
The portion in the West Gray area has not been developed for residential purposes. They may have the odd farm structure or residential structure on some of that land, but no large scale development in the West Gray portion.
So if I can add, then that's 7-8 years, and the constraint of Hanover hasn't needed that land as of yet. Obviously, nothing's happened with it, so they've been able to find land. Okay, just wanted to make myself clear on that.
Thank you, Your Worship. A little further detail on Hanover's growth context. Official Plan Amendment number 3 was approved in 2021, a couple of years ago. Further defined how Hanover will develop within its boundaries by designated former special policy areas to residential and employment designations. The Official Plan Amendment ensures all lands within Hanover are planned for before considering expansion to the settlement area. Development and intensification targets have been met or exceeded for new developments. And you can see the detailed schematic there, hard to read, I'm sure, on the diagram. Looking ahead to the future and the projections for growth, future growth scenarios, an important point to reinforce that growing out is only to be explored when options for growing up have been exhausted. And this is reflected in the provincial policy statement as well. And so, for example, Hanover's OPA number 3 designated all lands within Hanover. The majority of developments over the past few years have been achieving a minimum density of 25 units per hectare, which is mandated by the county official plan. A recent approval of a multi-story development, including 2 6-story apartment buildings and a 7-story commercial apartment building combined use. Note on OPA 11, the county's official plan included 2 new potential future secondary plan areas in West Gray abutting Hanover, which has been referred to the Ontario Land Tribunal by West Gray and the Magwood family farm. That official plan amendment, of course, is not in force and effect. And finally, on that slide, Hanover's growth studies have also identified 2 potential future growth areas in Brockton to the west. Expanding on future growth scenarios, areas 1 and 2, you can see on the plan, are proposed future secondary plan areas on West Gray lands. Hanover has also explored areas 3 and 4 in Brockton and Bruce County. The province requires that when designating any new settlement area lands adjacent to an existing settlement area, that all options are considered. And quite understandably, crossing a county boundary is typically more difficult than working on a solution within the same county. And looking at my recollection of Hanover heading towards Walkerton, there is a fairly significant natural constraint in some sections of that western boundary area as well. A little more detail on official plan amendment number 11. And you can see the schedule there, or schedule, depending on your pronunciation. The areas identified as 1 and 3 are the subject lands, which are reflected in OPA number 11.
Yeah, Murray, if I may, just a question. Just looking at the diagram on page 25, future growth scenarios. So that area 1, when you look down at the next page 27, it becomes area 1 and 3. So I'm curious why the change there, like why the two. I'm maybe looking at one's official plan amendment number 11, so maybe that has something to do with it. I don't know. Can you explain? Do you know why that is, or maybe staff can explain that to me? Oh, sorry.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, I'd like to call on Laura Lee Spencer, our planner. She's zoomed in, I believe. And she has her hand raised. Look at that. Thanks, Laura Lee.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Just a point of correction. So if you look at the legend on Schedule A5, the future secondary plan area is separate from the existing separate areas. So the hatch lines are different. So area 2 is included in the consideration under OPA 11. In addition, OPA 11 also includes the future secondary plan area of number 3. Number 1 is not related to OPA 11, just for clarity purposes.
That's helpful. Thank you. Thank you for the question. If we can move on, please. Future secondary plan area. We love acronyms in our business. FSPA background. In OPA, the future secondary plan areas have been proposed since November 2021. These are supported by planning, environmental, and engineering studies completed by Hanover. Important to reinforce that future secondary plan area designations are not a boundary adjustment, really intended only to identify lands that may be needed for future growth purposes. And a very important point to stress here is that the policies of agricultural and rural designations and agricultural use still apply to these lands. And finally, future OPAs, zoning amendments, and service expansions are needed before any development can occur on those OPA number 11 future secondary plan areas. Those are all very important points. Further background on the FSPA, additional public processes, of course, will be required as part of these future official plan and zoning bylaw amendments pursuant to the Planning Act. Discussions between and among Hanover, West Grey, and Grey County are needed before any development of the FSPAs. Grey County has received comments in support of and in opposition to the FSPAs proposed in OPA 11 from landowners and municipalities. Grey County, West Grey, and Hanover staff continue to discuss the FSPAs and next steps. And that's an important dimension of this overall conversation. Moving on from the land use projections and scenarios, this has been interesting for me in looking at municipal boundary decisions and recent changes in boundaries that have been affected. And in looking at other municipal examples, there were several experiences of boundary agreements which benefited both municipalities. There are examples cited here of compensation and annexation agreements. There's quite a wide range actually in the packages that have been arrived at in terms of settlements on these matters. And they include lump sum or payment in installments, shared assessment in perpetuity for a defined time period, collection of fees on a per building permit or per unit basis and revenue sharing there, payment of costs or legal fees required to effect a boundary change, payments for the transfer of infrastructure reflecting the investment of if you will, the parent municipality, one-time payments made to property owners, if there are property tax implications and impacts, phased in boundary adjustments, very common, joint prosperity agreements, I think is perhaps the most significant point on that slide. And there are also examples of shared services and revenue streams that are associated with utilities. We're in the home stretch, Your Worship. Important considerations. A very important slide to reinforce here that all options should be on the table and should be considered and discussed, and that would include, and this is not exclusive, but would possibly include shared servicing, boundary adjustments or annexation. Amalgamation is an option that is really required to address, at least in the conversation. Options that advance and achieve municipal prosperity, mutual prosperity, should be considered, and that is the notion of a win-win-win scenario, that each municipality needs to benefit from whatever options are considered. I know in one of the staff meetings, it did occur to me, having worked through quite a number of collective agreement and contract negotiations in a unionized environment. And the cliche in those circumstances are typically if both parties leave the room equally unhappy, then you know you've succeeded. This, I would offer, would take the opposite approach, that if there are any decisions taken and a path forward selected, then each of the parties must walk out of the room pleased and delighted and reflecting a package or a path forward that is benefits your ratepayers, your community equally for both parties. And very important, this was a qualifier for me, and something that I identified, and there was no issue with it, certainly shared, that these discussions really need to be built on the basis of openness and transparency. And I would add to that mutual trust and respect should really underlie all of these conversations. So arriving at a win-win-win scenario, a few questions will help guide the process. What does, and these are questions for you to perhaps reflect on and think about over the next midterm. What does success look like for each municipality? You're going to want to take, I think, if the conversation moves ahead, a closer look at some of those fairly recent decisions that have been taken on boundary adjustments. What does each municipality desire? Are you looking for development land, assessment growth, servicing, employment lands, commercial development, residential development? And what are the impacts of not achieving a locally initiated solution? And we can look for recent decisions coming from Cabinet on boundary adjustments that would at least inform that consideration. What are the concerns or fears of each municipality that will need to be addressed going forward? Considerations for your ratepayers, your landowners, and the activity that's taking place within those lands? How will residents and businesses be engaged in the process moving forward? That's a critical dimension of this discussion. Are there areas for collaboration or joint marketing? I know it had been at least raised during one or two of our staff meetings, the notion of the joint economic development initiative or strategy, joint regional business park, for example, was mentioned. And how can we work collectively together to be stronger? And emphasis in that bullet point there is work collectively. We're definitely in the home stretch, Your Worship. Looking at next steps, the same material, this identical presentation will be made to Hanover Council next Tuesday. So another trip north for me. No snow on the ground in Guelph, by the way, but quite a bit in the Mount Forest Arthur area. We'll present the same material next week. The overall team will review input and feedback from both councils and staff, and your conversations, the outcome of your deliberations, and your thinking. And if each council agrees to continue to work together collaboratively to address opportunities for each community. And that's the second time opportunity has been spelled with a U. And recommend that each council select 2 council representatives to participate in future facilitated discussions. So that's really, I guess, the ask of that slide, as well as looking to you to deliberate and reflect on these concepts and thoughts that we've outlined in the slide deck. And that really brings us to comments and questions. Again, any detailed questions on land use and certainly your own growth scenarios, I would look to your staff for that sort of intelligence. And if I can, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have of me. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your work so far. As you kept saying, this is getting close to the end. This is only the beginning as I see it.
Well, full disclosure, to be candid, Your Worship, if I understand clearly the terms of my engagement, which is somewhat ambiguous, once I appear before Hanover Council next week, it's very likely that my role in this process will end, although I would love to stay engaged. I mean, you consider I'm a student and a lover of municipal world. This is fascinating for me, this kind of work. I would never have imagined in 100 years that this would come my way, and it's great to remain engaged. My entire career has been in the small, rural and small town market. So, you know, this is really a thrill for me. It's fascinating to be involved, and I'd love to remain involved if there's a role for me, of course.
Okay. Any questions, Murray, at this point in time? No? One of the questions or statements that was made quite a bit by yourself in the presentation was collaborative and openness. And now I've got the acronym and I can't explain to you what it even means. The FSPA, Future Settlement Projected Area. What was that? Is that close to what it was? Future Secondary Plan.
That's right.
Oh, there we are. Thank you, Jeannie. You had stated that had started in November or was presented in November 2021.
OPA 11, that's my understanding.
So a lot of that background information had already been started to be inputted into the county. I'm at a bit of a disadvantage. I wasn't involved in that at that point in time. But the collaborative part of that, the studies that were done, my understanding is most of them were from Hanover's projected growth studies and everything of that nature. Is that what you found?
Yes, that's my understanding. I would offer that one of the concepts that we identified early on at the staff level was that we can't ignore the past. We can't ignore the lessons that we've learned or the intelligence that we've gathered. But the emphasis in this conversation is very much on looking to the future and I think establishing a fresh strategy, a fresh, as you say, Your Worship, and I've reinforced collaborative conversation here. The background work that the county has done in growth and settlement, both for West Grey and Hanover, is informative. It does respond to the provincial planning statement mandated 25-year growth and settlement horizon. And it does inform the process. The conversation that we're having now and certainly the emphasis and the thrust is looking to the future and a great deal of emphasis on that notion of mutual prosperity.
And in saying that, so collaboratively working on those studies, I guess I would look to staff. They seem to emphasize an awful lot on West Grey's land and Brockton's land. The study identifies, I think Councillor Hutchison said it in page 25, 26. How much input or work was done collaboratively with West Grey and or Brockton on getting there? Those studies available on the lands that were involved or under West Grey's jurisdiction. Everybody's pointing to you, Laura Lee, with your hand up, so you have the answer to that. Thank you.
Sorry about that. I was having trouble with my speaker. I just wanted to clarify that the history surrounding the documents at hand. So the County of Grey, as the upper tier municipality, was required to complete a growth management strategy in accordance with the 2020 PPS. So that was completed at the county level, and that was to identify which areas of the lower tier municipalities would see growth and in what form that growth would look like in terms of numbers. In essence, the town of Hanover also completed a separate growth management strategy that identified areas of where their concern was with how much land they have and the predicted growth they have and how much land they are predicted to require over the course of the next 25 years. The two studies are very separate. And those areas that are being discussed as part of OPA 11 are not necessarily brought about by the growth management strategy at the county level. They're directed through the findings of the town of Hanover growth management strategy, which in turn identified those two areas within Brockton and areas 1 and 3 that are shown on the Schedule A5 that was previously shown on the slide. I just wanted to make that clear that it wasn't just a collaborative effort between Bruce County and Grey County. It was a document prepared by Grey County, and the town of Hanover undertook their own independent growth management strategy, which brought about the identified areas of 1 and 3 through their consultants.
And I'm taking it, reading between the lines there of your statement, Ms. Spencer, that West Grey had, or Brockton, very little input on from a collaborative approach with Hanover at that point to make that dealing with the lands outside of Hanover's boundary. Yes or no? Yes? No?
If I may, through you, Mr. Mayor, if I understand what you're asking is how much input Wes Gray had into the town of Hanover's study they conducted, if I understand what you're saying correctly. I'm sorry, maybe I'm misinterpreting what you're saying.
You're pretty much on. Keep going.
Sorry, thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. So that is correct. I mean, the town of Hanover and their consultants did make presentations to Wes Gray over the course of time. However, those, the input into the findings and justifications, and we didn't peer review their documents. Certainly in terms of that input, the municipality didn't have a say about where those lands might look like and what might be feasible through their consultants. I suppose there could have been more of a collaborative effort that way, but that's not how the study occurred. Wes Gray was informed of the numbers and where things were going, but they weren't necessarily part of the discussions at the table to identify those two areas and the areas in Brockton as well. I don't know how much input Brockton had to that discussion as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll reserve the right to speak again, but Doug, go ahead. Councillor Hutchison.
Yeah, so just looking at the bullets under future secondary plan area, page 28. The first bullet says the FSPA and OP11 have been proposed. Second bullet. Oh, I lost my spot here. Maybe I'm in the wrong page here. Anyways, what it boils down to that before we move forward in any direction, that there will be more public input and opportunity. I guess it's the next page, 29. Additional public process will be required as part of these future official plan and zoning bylaw amendments. So I think that's important. We did have when Hanover presented to Wes Gray Council, previous council, we had quite a bit of public input from some from the local farming community, some from local ownership that lived in the area. Some were for and some were against it, as we know. I think what I'm looking for from this, where we're at right now, is we need to make a plan for the future. I think it's evident that Owen Sound is one of the cities in West Gray. Hanover is the next biggest city in Gray County, not West Gray, in Gray County, and Hanover's second. So I think we have to recognize that really they are a shopping center that's going to grow regardless of what we say or do. I think it's going to happen down the road, whether we're here or not. So I think that's important. And I think what I want to seek out of this is I want to see, as it says in here, a win-win-win, a win for us. What that looks like in terms of service agreements, boundary adjustments, I don't know. And I think literally, I think a lot of people out there don't really care. All as they know is they drive across on Highway 4 to Hanover to do a bit of shopping, and if they can buy stuff in Durham, they'll do it. If they can buy stuff in Newstead or Ayton, they will. But I think it's a fact of life that Hanover is the biggest shopping center in our area, and they're going to grow. And they're going to grow into West Gray. And what that looks like for us is important because we want to gain from that, just like they're going to gain from it. So, but I mean, we're going to gain lots of ways, whether it be monetary or whether it be way of jobs or a way of housing or people. There's all kinds of benefits, I think, from their growth that we're going to gain. So I think that's important that we keep that in mind, that this is really, yeah, it's Hanover. And I know there's some animosity going way back to the days of the high school in Durham between Durham and Hanover. But regardless of that, there's a lot of people nowadays that have no idea what that's all about and couldn't care less, right? Those are days gone by, but there are a few out there that still have that. But for us, I think it's what can we do to make this work so that we all gain, so there's growth in Hanover, there's growth in West Gray, in particular in Durham and Newstead, where our water and sewers are. So let's make it work, let's move forward and make this thing work. And like I say, win-win for everybody. That's where I'm coming from. Thank you.
Anybody further? What are our next steps? We down to that already? My legislative services clerk Mr. Eckensweiler is saying next steps into this process through discussions, having discussions and moving this forward. One of the recommendations from Mr. Clark is to appoint 2 individuals to a working group. Murray, is that what you're suggesting?
I think that's a good moniker, Your Worship.
To continue on the path of trying to find that win-win. Win. Is that 3? I'm trying to, yeah, keep them going here. So I look for direction from the council here as to who or whom we would like to designate or appoint. So I'll go with Joyce first, then you, Tom.
Thank you, Mayor Eccles. I would recommend that Doug Hutchinson be one of our representative. He was one of the members in the former council, and I love his approach. He's very open-minded about the whole situation, so I feel one of our representatives be Doug Hutchinson. Thank you.
Councillor Hutchison. Doug?
Yeah, so I just want to speak to that. Thank you, Joyce, for that opportunity. I'd just like to remind council that we did go down this road previously. We created a committee. We had 2 representatives from West Grey, and we had 2 representatives from Hanover. I don't know if we had, I don't think we had any county representative at the time, but and staff. We found that we started out with that, and we had some meetings, and then it turned out that council decided that to disband that committee because we felt that we were meeting and getting ideas, and then we're bringing it back, and then had to rehash the whole thing with the whole council. Like, I knew what was going on, and it was the mayor, and I think we just had 2. It was 3, just 2. Oh, Townsend. Okay, right. There was 3 of us, right? So there was 3 of us on that committee. So then we come back, and and then people were saying, well, I feel a little bit left out because, you know this, but we don't really know this. So, so I'm not too sure if that's the answer. Like, I would be maybe more comfortable with having staff and the mayors be our representative. I mean, I don't mind being on there if you want me to be on there, but I just think that because they get the information and they have to bring it back and give it to all councils. So all councils inform, not just a small group, and then they're trying to rehash it for the rest of the council. So that's sort of my feeling on that, is that I don't know the 2 representatives really works all that well. I would be more comfortable with the mayors because ultimately come down to the end, they're going to ones who can take the flack. So there's no sense in me taking flack if I don't have to. But
38 years, and you see, nothing in politics has changed, right? Okay, thank you.
so anyways, that's where I'm coming from. I just think that it might be better just to have the mayors and staff. But that's just my point of view. Thank you.
I will say that what we have for the recommendation from Mr. Clark and his professional opinion is to have 2 people on it, but the wish of council's wish of council. I'll look for more input from our CEO, Laura.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and Councillor Hutchinson, to just expand a little bit. You're correct. The last model that we had, we had some good discussions, but it wasn't very productive. I'm a lot more confident this time because, as you'll notice in that slide, it talks about future facilitated discussions, and I think we've kind of got a better balance this time than we did the last time. I agree that it would be, the 2 council reps in my opinion, should include the mayor and another counselor. Let's not forget that staff will be involved in this along the way. Last time, there wasn't the same quantity of staff and the expertise at that table. So I think that we're positioned a little bit differently. If Mr. Clark is able to continue facilitating some of the initial discussions, I think that will set the path for us as well. But, I would recommend that in addition to the mayor, there is a council rep, just for that, additional perspective. You're much more tapped into the community than staff necessarily are. So that would be my recommendation. And sometimes you sign up to take the flat, councillor.
I'm sorry, jump to Deputy Mayor Hutchison. Tom?
Thank you, Mayor Eccles. So I would be prepared to present a motion. Clerk is ready. Okay, so I would move that Councillor Hutchinson and Mayor Eccles be appointed as West Gray reps for the working group.
Jamie?
Through you, Mayor, and to you, Deputy Mayor Hutchinson, I did take the liberty to draft something up while we were speaking, so I'll just read that back. So that in consideration of a presentation from Murray Clark respecting growth, prosperity in West Gray and Hanover, Council appoints Mayor Eccles and Councillor Hutchinson as representatives of West Gray to participate in future facilitated discussions between West Gray and Hanover.
Yes, that's what I was moving. Thank you.
Okay. Got the motion, then we'll accept that as a motion. Is there a seconder? Councillor Forrester. Any further discussion on the motion at this point in time? Councillor Hutchison, Tom, or Doug?
I'm just curious, if I vote, does that create a conflict of interest or I'm okay to vote?
What's the correct statement from the legislative services? And clerk would say, I cannot give advice on, I cannot give advice. But I will state this, that I'll be voting on this motion as it's an interest in common, I believe. Okay, any further questions or comments on this? Call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. All right. Anything else? Is there anything else that we need to consider at this time? As I see Murray's, well, there is a hand on the screen, but I think that's Laura Lee's and she just hasn't taken it down yet. I'm hopeful that's what it is. Yes, okay. Cody, that's what I took. And I see that Mr. Clark has folded up his papers and saying, I would take that he's saying, I'm out of here now. Any final comments or thoughts? Murray.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would just reinforce how grateful I am for the opportunity to appear before you and to meet you all. It's a pleasure to be here and to work with Laura. It's been a real treat. And I want to thank you for your warm reception today. And I look forward to hopefully further conversation on this. It's much appreciated, Your Worship.
Well, much appreciated for your work up to this point of getting us moving this along. I'm going to ask, on the agenda, there was a portion to go into closed session. Is there a thought process from anyone that we need a closed session at this point in time if we're going to be discussing anything strategic about this process going forward? Maybe look towards staff if you think it needs to be or not. Laura?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The closed session is a placeholder in the event that council required more information or clarity, either from Mr. Clark or staff. Having achieved our goal of appointing 2 members, if it's council's comfort, we can conclude the meeting.
I'm just the chair of the meeting. I'm not the guy that operates. the meeting. That's you. Are we close to that, Jamie? Yep. Okay. Yes, then if there's no other business on the topic, we don't need a closed session, then we're down to bylaws. We need a confirming bylaw that's there, 2023-032, confirming the actions of this meeting. Moved by Deputy Mayor Hutchison, seconded by, excuse me, Councillor Townsend. Any questions or comments on that bylaw? Call the vote. All those in favor? Any opposed? That one is carried. Declared that carried. That is all the businesses on the agenda. With that said, I'll move adjournment. Thank you very much. And again, thank you very much for coming up today, Murray. And yes, we had this weather just for you.